Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Shirley Plantin. I am the Chief Executive Consultant for U-Turn Youth Consulting. Our mission at U-Turn is to unmask the backstories to intersection, actually, make it even simpler, is to unmask the intersectional ties between systems and their inequities and how those systems contribute to the backstories that lead to the school to prison pipeline and ultimately the gun violence in our community. I am an attorney by trade. Quick intro about myself. I'm sure many of you may have already read the bio. I'm an attorney by trade. I'm a member of the Florida Gang Investigative Association for the state of Florida. I serve on the Florida Police Chiefs Association for Accountability and Societal Change. And I'm also a commissioner for the Miami-Dade State Attorney's Continuing Justice Reform. I said all of that to say nothing matters more to me than saving the lives of young people. That is my passion. I completely understand that, and that is my calling. I have provided services directly for about 18, 19 years. And now we realize that a lot of times, give me the kids more than you give me the adults, because the adults are the ones that don't always get it. So my job now is to really help adults understand the magnitude of what our young people are addressing. I'm an author of a book called The Backstory of a New Reality, Jaw-Dropping Unmasking of Urban Youth Violence. It has its accompanying workbook, which is currently being used in Dade County Public Schools, Broward County Public Schools, several different police departments. So we're doing the work, really trying to change systems from within as much as we can. So today's been a heavy day. Today there's been a lot of conversations about progress, a lot of conversations about moving forward, a lot of conversations about where we are as we celebrate this magnitude of a decision that happened yesterday. So we know Juneteenth started off really gaining attention publicly as a result of the entire Black Lives Matter movement during the George Floyd. More people were looking at the Tulsa bombing, more people were looking at Juneteenth. So there's really been an attention to Black issues, right? And the history of Black people in this community, in this country. And the title of this course is Black and Brown Youth, Their Backstories Matter. I was very intentional in that is because oftentimes within our own communities, there are the issues of colorism, right? In my prior classes, I didn't get into it, but there are issues of colorism, and not everybody sees themselves as Black, and not everybody sees themselves as Hispanic. And then there are so many mixtures of cultures happening within the Black community. It is imperative that when we speak, we don't try to alienate anyone out of the Black diaspora. That being said, I need to give my disclaimer. This is a very blunt, honest, raw course. As I said earlier, any of my students who participated in Courageous Conversation Beyond Diversity last year, they will be my first proponents of saying, she raw. She gonna give it to you real. I'm a firm believer that we don't have time to babysit. We don't have time to tither tat. Mona Lisa say, yes, she is. Hi, Mona Lisa. We don't have time to tither tat around what's really happening. The world is happening, changes are happening, and we either need to own up to it, because the sooner we own up to it, then the sooner we can impact real change and be impactful in what it is that we do every day. That being said, this is a raw course, and we will have frank conversations. People who have also been a part of my course know I don't like to look at black screens. But since this is a conference, I'm gonna be nice to y'all. My last course, people came on, I'm here, just wanting to be supportive. So yes, please, either the snaps, comment on the chat, let us know that you're engaged. Again, I know you're tired. You've been here since 2 o'clock. We're gonna try to get you out, but I promise your last course of the day for the general session, I promise to make it as engaging as possible. With that in mind, is everybody good with that? Here's my first test. See, I didn't have to test my second session because they got it. So I'm gonna test my first, okay. I see my first snap. Everybody good with that? Is everybody with me? Another one. Ooh, see, y'all gonna make me call out on some people, then I'm gonna be mean, right? Okay, there we go. I see y'all. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Smart. Thank you. All right. See, people don't want me calling out on them, so I won't be picking on y'all. Thank you for engaging. Thank you so much. Let me share my screen and let's get started. Dorothy said, I had you last summer. Hi, Dorothy. I hope you guys will join. For my former students, I will be teaching. What am I teaching starting next week? Cultural competency for academic achievement. Y'all know that's about to be lit. Really talking about cultural competency and everything that's happening around the country. So if you haven't signed up, I will be teaching that starting Tuesday. Let us share our screen and let's get started. All righty. Sorry about that. My apologies. Okay. Black and brown youth, their backstories matter. Again, I like to say I don't like them looking for me talking about, I need an objective. So there's always an objective to my courses. Participants will be exposed to the various factors contributing to youth violence and how these elements are creating a state of emergency among youth in our community. The reason that we have decided to focus on the youth is because if we're celebrating Juneteenth and our young people don't understand the value of it, and we as providers and educators and practitioners also don't understand the value of passing on the culture, then it is almost as if this 94-year-old Miss Opa Lee did all this work for nothing to make this a federal holiday. So that is the reason why we're focusing on our young people. What are backstories? So this presentation and the term backstory is a term that we are, my firm is very big on, and maybe it's because it is the title of the book, but we firmly believe that we can't understand where we're going until we understand where we come from. And we hear that a lot. It's a bit cliche. You got to know your history to know your future. True. But backstories sometimes don't need to be too far back in history. Hello?
That's a lot.
You did such a good job on the first one.
Thank you. Root causes. So they don't need to be so back in history like we're talking about, you know, slavery day, but backstories are the things that make us or break us. We all have them. So that's the first place we need to start, is that we all have backstories. The only difference between us and our youth is we have either allowed our backstories to make us and propel us forward, and some of us have allowed our youth to be the demise of who we are because we allow them to serve as barriers in our lives. So other terminologies that may be a tad bit more acceptable to people if they don't want to use the word backstories: root causes, contributing factors, contributing elements, compounding elements, lived experiences, origin. The only one that's not on here is epidemiology, and I'll dive into that a little bit more. But lived experiences become a bit more acceptable. Really, that took off around the time of the George Floyd protests, because so many people were saying, well, the lived experience of the Black community, the lived experience of the Black man, the lived experience of the Hispanic man. And then we look at everything that has happened from then to now, the lived experience of Black communities as it relates to the mistrust in systems, and that played itself out in COVID, the lived experience of the inequities in the criminal justice system and the school system. So we'll talk about all of that, you know, in the course on Tuesday, but really trying to understand that lived experiences and your backstories are important. And if we are to really make an impact, if we are to really utilize what we have now with Juneteenth moving forward and not understanding lived experience, we'd be failing our communities and our young people. Children, teens, we utilize the term children, teens, youth, young people interchangeably, because again, just like the LGBTQ community, it all depends on how that kid sees themselves, right? Depending on their age and whatnot. So this picture is very meaningful. And the reason that this picture is meaningful is because, just so if anybody ever doubted, these are real pictures from Miami-Dade and Broward students and kids that have been killed. There are more recent pictures. We try to stay as far away as possible in date and time to not re-traumatize families. But this is real. This is just in 1 year. In 2016 alone, we had 36 students. We had 36 children die, ranging from 2-year-olds to 17, 18, 19-year-olds. Why are we doing this? Why is this picture here? Because I need to sensitize us to understand that each one of these students had a backstory, whether they were the victims or whether they're shooters, they had backstories. And I say that to say, in my time of doing this work, I've been at funeral homes. I've stood in the gap with parents to stand at funeral homes where I've had to have some of my own kids say to me, yo, SP, they call me SP on the streets, yo, SP, you got to get out of here. They about to light this up. And I thought it was a joke. They're like, no, no, no. Like they're literally pushing me and escorting me out. And by the time I made it about 5 blocks under the overpass of I-95, I could literally hear the funeral home being lighted up, right? I've had students shot 18 times. I've had young women beat on their fathers because parents came home and found all the gang members at their house and they turned on their own. Like I have stories for days of me and my young people. And by God's grace, many of them have turned their lives around, but it wasn't without learning from them as well. So in a decade, 2006 to 2016, there are current numbers. I like to say I'm not necessarily a fan of data because you can utilize that data to tell whatever story you want. And oftentimes what we're using for the research may not have necessarily been vetted in our communities, the terminologies, the usage, when to vet and all this other stuff. So yes, I understand the value of it. I understand we need it. We need to capture data, but a lot of times we need to be very honest if the data is not always as clear as we want it to be. 316 children died by gun violence in a 10-year period, and an average of 30. Right now, if I look on here, I think we have close to 30 people. So that would mean everybody on this particular session right now would have been alienated in a 1-year school year time, okay? And the deaths were results of domestic violence, children caught in crossfires, gun violence between one another. The rare instances, we call it rare, but one just happened. And I've been giving this example all day, is really people playing with a gun, thinking that, no harm can come of it. And you had a 24 and an 18-year-old pair of sisters who came down here from Atlanta for Memorial Day weekend, and they wanted to make it a lit moment for Instagram. And the 24-year-old put the gun to the head of the 18-year-old and shot her. And she's dead. And we don't realize. So when we talk about teens, we're not just stopping at 18 because the school system, the foster care system, a lot of the funders will go up until 21, 22 for students who may have disabilities. When there are victims, as a result of what we saw from Memorial Day weekend, you had the El Mula mass shooting, you had the mass shooting, you had the shootings, you had the shootings in Wynwood, you had the shootings, you just had shootings. That just seems to be what we've had between Broward and Dade County. And the questions have always been specifically around the victims. Oh my God, we ask probing questions when it's the victims. What else did we know about these kids? Oh my God, their future was so bright. What were they dealing with at home? We could have seen, there could have been so much that they could have contributed to this world. Who else could have done a better job keeping these kids safe? What could the parents have done better? But very few people ask, what are their backstories? But we're asking probing questions as it relates to the victims, whether they survive or they die. And then we start to look at the shooters. And the part about the shooters is we fail to realize that before they became a shooter, they too were a part of the same class that we would call the victims, right? Because there is this terminology that suspect today, victim tomorrow, because our children live in the same concept of retaliation and rotating. And the questions often are similar. What else do we know about these kids? What are they dealing with at home? Many of these teachers, how many teachers came in contact with them and didn't do anything? How many after school programs could have been a part? What did the parents do? And then the one that really bothers me that we rarely ask is, why is this behavior normal? Why is this acceptable for our young people to pick up a gun, take someone else's life, and see no ill will in that? And then the other question that we don't ask, but we should be asking, what are their backstories? So on this picture, I'm gonna ask, I can be mean and call on some people. I'm going to voluntarily allow some people to come off their mics and tell me when you see this slide, what do you think? I'm gonna call on some people now.
Perspective.
Perspective. What else? Joanne, what do you see? Bernard, what do you see?
I see two viewpoints, depending on the angle that you're looking from. So immediately just seeing the two pictures together, depending on their angle, you might see something being devoured and then something being cared for. You know, having had cats, I've seen that, the way they carry them from two different point of views. And at one point I did think she was hurting her kitten, but from the other side, I realized she wasn't.
Perfect. You nailed it, because that's exactly what this is about. This is about perspective, but beyond perspective, it's what's that first thought, right? What are we, and oftentimes we don't have all the viewpoint to make our own conclusion. So a lot of times our young people do things and we're drawing our own conclusion predominantly from our viewpoint. May not have, and I think Bernard said it well, we may not have all the story, but we've already drawn our conclusion. So it wasn't until, as he well said, when he first saw it, he thought that she was hurting her cub, when in reality, she was caring for the cub by carrying her from one point to another. This slide it embodies what it is that we're going to discuss today. Because at the end of the day, if we are not willing to adjust our perspective, to adjust our viewpoint, not to what we see, but to what they're living, everything depends on what we see, right? It's and a lot of times it's a word that people, they cringe when you say, is the word privilege. Our privilege, our backstories determine our privilege, and our privilege then dictates our viewpoints and our perspectives. So a lot of times we are judging, why would that kid do this? And why would that parent, for example, you're trying to reach a parent and when you're reaching them, nobody's answering the phone, nobody's returning the call. We often draw our own perspective and our own conclusions based on our privilege, because we know if that were my child, and I often hear teachers say this and educators in general, if that were my child, I would have been running to the school. But has it dawned on us that maybe you can't run to the school because you have a job that isn't as lenient, or a job that may not be as understanding, or the fact that you were undocumented and this job is the only way you have to provide for your child, and this is the only thing you have that's keeping you, or you're fearful of systems. So taking all of that into account, oftentimes we don't do. And so today the conversation is to understand that young people as well are carrying backstories that a lot of times we don't understand because we don't have the total picture. It's not our lived experience, and it makes it very difficult for us to relate to something that is not our lived experience, particularly if we're not willing to learn about it. So some of the experiences, some of the backstories that we'll reference today, and trust me, there's a whole lot more, but some of the backstories that we'll reference, the picture at the top right, top left, is an image that we've become almost immune to, right? We were desensitized to it. Young Black and brown men being arrested, cops are hauling them off. And it's like, oh, well, another group of Black men. Then you have the picture in the middle, which is really about the drugs and not realizing that our kids are taking all types of drugs. And the drugs that they're taking, chased with alcohol, oftentimes impairs their ability to think logically, which forces them to do some things that maybe off of the drugs they may not have taken. But the reality is then you have students who are actually on medication, take on prescribed medication for any form of disability, and then they're pairing it up with other medication. And as providers, we're just thinking everything is okay. And then the third one is the concept of for sale. I need you to understand this picture is a lot more real than we often give it credit for, because the reality is in the past, it used to be back page. In the past, there were a lot of the other, posts for purchase. But right now you have Reddit and you have a lot of the new ones. And these aren't people that are coming in for conferences. And I said this in the last session, Miami, and a lot of times they mesh Miami and Broward together, is known as a sexy city. So we host a lot of conferences between the two ports, between the two airports. We have tons of people that come here for conferences, that are here for events, that are here for high impact weekends, as we like to call them in my world. And they were hiring girls and boys before they even got here. They were purchasing them. So now we're realizing that there is more of an uptick of parents posting their children for sale. So home is not always your safest place. The people that are supposed to be your safe harbors may not always be that person. Your picture at the bottom left, you have the guns, the weed, the drugs, the kush, the K2, K7, and the list goes on. But then we also realize we've become desensitized to it. Our music, the media, the games, everything that's happening around our children, this has become part of our culture. Human trafficking is real, where the prices of a young boy and the price of a young girl is very different. But yet still, who is doing the human trafficking is some of our same young people who have money from the PPPs and the drugs and all that other stuff, who are trafficking their own. And then the last one at the very bottom right is an image that we have become too comfortable with, is looking at young Black and brown men sitting in prison with the corrections get up on. And then as we look at this picture, the one thing I dare for us to challenge to think is that through the loins of these young men is an entire generation, right? They carry life, they carry livelihoods, because without them, there is no child for a woman to bear. So if we do not begin to look at our failure of young Black and brown youth and how we provide for them and how we take care of them, and as in connection with what our generations and our futures will look like, then we have already begun to fail our kids. So some of the realities that we really want to talk about is the urgency, right? Our children are living in a state of emergency on a constant basis. Our children are living in fight or flight state all the time. So when you have a kid that says to you, I don't expect to be here past 17 and 18, and you as an educator or a practitioner, your very first question in an attempt to connect is, what do you want to be 5 years from now? You've already lost that kid because they can't think that far. And the reason they can't think that far is because their entire livelihood that they know, that lived experience, when kids are saying to you, well, I don't know, because I've never seen anybody else from the hood live past 17 and 18. It should change our perspective of how we deal with children, because a generation that is hopeless, a generation without aspirations, is a generation set up to fail. And if that is our generation, then the struggles of Juneteenth should speak volumes to us even more, because that would mean our transfer of knowledge, our transfer of information, our transfer of culture, our transfer of everything that we are as a Black people is fractured, because there isn't another party on the other end willing to accept the baton to move it forward. Backstories, we're talking about backstories, so I'm going to skip that one. Then you have the concept of role reversals. Ladies and gentlemen, that is a backstory by itself. It's funny to me how the very same people that just signed for this day to be a federal holiday is also saying, we don't want you to know your history, right? We're not going to give you the opportunity to know the full history. The very same people that are signing, that just signed to accept that and make tomorrow, Juneteenth, a full federal holiday, are the very same people that are deciding that I'm not going to pay you your full living wage so that you can be what you need to be for your child and be where you need to be. Because the reality is you got to work 2 and 3 jobs to make a living, and your child, so that means you're not home with the child. And because you're not home with the child, then now the child is watching you struggle. And now that child is out on the streets, and they're coming home with the iPhone 12. They're coming home with the hairdos and the nails that you didn't pay for, the car that you didn't pay for. And because he or she is breaking you off a little something, you can't say anything. And then we expect for that child to understand that they're still the child. No, there's something that's happening. It's called the role reversal. So that role reversal already almost takes away from the entire fight of Juneteenth, because the ideal was to be able to keep our families together. The concept of Juneteenth, the concept of slavery, they broke apart our families because they kept the men in one place and they kept the women in one place. Doesn't that sound familiar? It should sound familiar, because there are still systems in place right now where in order for a mom to get a voucher or a place to stay, the father cannot be in the house. So technically, the very same people that are telling us that they want to celebrate Juneteenth and they want to celebrate the freedom, what freedom do we really have if we cannot keep our families together? Our young people are living on the edge because at any moment they may not be here. Our family, our children are living on the edge because in their minds, they glorify death more than they glorify life. The irreality, so when our children are playing GTA and they're playing, what's that? So we have Grand Theft Auto and they're playing Fortnite and we're sitting here and we're letting them, it's all good, it's a game. But then we turn around and we're looking like all they're doing is they're all shooting games, and the promoters of these games, the creators of these games have made them as diverse as possible, as real as possible. They look exactly like you and me. They're not even cartoons no more. So you're expecting a kid with a frontal lobe that has not been fully developed yet to understand, if I play this game 6, 7, 8 hours a day, I shoot this person, but when I come around the corner, that same person pops back up. Then when I get out on the streets and I grab a gun, that's not going to happen. Yeah, that's because we continue to fail our children. And then we look at youth violence, and then we should begin to ask ourselves, the same country, right, that is having an epidemic of gun violence, whether it be in Chicago, whether it be in Baltimore, whether it be in Dallas, whether it be in New York, whether it be in Miami, across our country, CDC we can't gather any information on gun violence. That should worry us. And then if you're going to really look at why is it that this is such an important conversation today, is because this same system has allowed us to take a step back and say, well, wait a minute. Let's think about it. We're talking about COVID. And the conversation about COVID right now is, where did it all begin? When HIV started, we were trying to find out the origin of it. Was it apes? Was it that an ape slept with a black man? So then we went to Wuhan and we said, yeah, the Asian people gave it to us. And that started off a whole heap of other things. The same thing it did with HIV, that basically said it was a whole bunch of black people or a whole bunch of gay people that brought it in. So now we're sitting here and we're looking at what are the origins. So there's a full conversation right now happening in Congress and around this country in the medical field, trying to figure out where COVID started. You know why? Because in order to fix a problem, you got to start from its origin. You got to start from its epidemiology. So explain to me why young Black people are dying. We know it's an epidemic and we know what's causing the epidemic, but what we choose to do, instead of solving it from the beginning, from its origin, we choose to solve it by putting a Band-Aid on a pandemic, by putting a Band-Aid on an epidemic that's wiping out a generation. So if we're going to look at Juneteenth for its totality of how far we've come, we also need to be very mindful of how far we have to go. Because when people say to us that I voted for this day because it was a symbolic move, that says to me, symbolic means you're not serious about making real change so that an entire race of people can progress in a country that has not been fair to them. And then we look at youth and disabilities, right? We like to say, well, it's a disability, but then we continue to perpetuate a system where parents want to come in for $647 and is going to demand that the school system declare their child has a disability because I need $647. And if you're not going to do it as a school psychologist, I'm going to go back and get it done by a private psychologist. The systems have not been built for us to succeed. So although we are benefiting and we're enjoying and we want to clap it up and snap it up because it's definitely history in the making and openly fought for years to make this happen. But there's a real conversation that we need to have as a people to say, how do we move forward? What is it that we need to take from this day to ensure that the baton doesn't stop with you and I sitting here? How do we pass it on to our children so that our children understand the story, so that our children understand this system is not built for you to succeed. So you got to try 10 times harder in order to make sure that your community is successful. And then we have this perspective of privilege as though wealthy kids don't do it. It's only poor Black and brown communities. I dare to challenge you that the same things that our young Black and brown communities in more impoverished neighborhoods are screaming for, which is to be loved, which is to be respected, which is to be acknowledged, many wealthy kids are dealing. And then when our privilege kicks in, I live on the West Side. I ain't got to worry about that because my kids will never deal with those kids. They ain't never go. Then you forget their social media. Our children live in this reality of lit moments. Their entire existence, as I said before, is about the likes and the shares. It's the challenges. It's the opportunity, which is why they're having sex with animals and they're posting it, which is why they're showing the amount of drugs they have. They're showing all their water money. They're showing all the drugs they have. They're showing all the guns it is about a lit moment. And if we as providers don't understand the lit moment and what they're living, we are addressing a present phenomenon with old school methods. And that is why we're losing our babies. So I want to be able to put some of us into context because, some of us, this ain't got nothing to do with me. So I just want to bring some of us back to some reality. We need to stop walking around downgrading people because of their struggles. Stop acting like you never had to call and get a bill extended. Stop acting like because you couldn't afford, stop acting like you never had to eat what you had because you couldn't afford what you really wanted. Stop acting like you've never had to catch a bus or a ride with someone because you didn't have a car and you ain't have money for bus. Stop acting like you never had anyone in your family or close to you do drugs or in jail. Let me add that too. Stop judging people because of their struggles. Remember, God sits high and he looks low. Be mindful. The struggles of someone today may be your struggles tomorrow. The objective to that is to help you understand, and myself. I don't believe in pointing fingers. It's to help us understand we are no better than the next man. The reality is we like to point the finger back at the home. And like I say, every time I have this part of the presentation, I will be the first one to tell a parent, I ain't tell you to have these kids. But now that they're here, they become all of our responsibility. They are incumbent on all of us that they not only live, they thrive and they succeed. Why? Because the success of one kid is the success of an entire community. The loss of one kid, whether it be to gun violence, whether it be to the prison system, the loss of one kid is a loss of a community. So when we like to revert back to, well, it all starts at the home, I agree. But home is a fully loaded word, because if any of y'all, and I think most of y'all on here will remember Luther Vandross, where he said a house is not a home. So we know that many of these kids, they may have houses, but don't have homes. We also know that many of these kids, the very first place that they are victimized is in the home, whether it be through molestation, whether it be through incest. The other place that someone will put a gun in the hand of a man, a boy, a lot of time comes from the household where somebody's saying, here's your gun, show me what you made of, man up. And that is how that boy or that young boy now dictates and figures and correlates that in order for me to be a man, I gotta have a gun. Home is not always safe. I wrote a whole article during COVID. Home is not always safe. Oftentimes, home is the most detrimental place for a kid to be, which is why the entire concept of quarantining was so hard for young people, because school is often an outlet. After school programs are a way for them to escape the realities that they deal with. And then we often say, well, the parents should have been home. Have we ever considered that maybe there aren't parents in the household at all? The family is the streets. We need to understand the concept is family as we knew it, whether it was a two-parent household, a single-parent house, that makeup is not necessarily the majority anymore. Right now, you have 18, 19-year-olds who are serving as parents for younger kids. You have aunties and uncles that are taking on the role, godmothers, godfathers. You got 80-year-old grandmothers that are trying to raise a 14-year-old son. So we are applying old school methods to something that does not even look like what we understand it to look like. That by itself says to us that our understanding of Juneteenth and everything that Mayor Pickett showed us today should say we got a problem. Because the history, everything that we've worked on, everything that the slaves gave up, they didn't ask to be here. But when they landed here, the very first thing is they separated us. Then they made us work our behinds off in order to build a country, the same country that doesn't respect you, but yet they're going to tell you, you matter. So when mom can't be home because she's working 2 and 3 jobs, dad can't be in the house because if he's in the house, then she can't get the vouchers or the opportunity to live in wherever she needs to live based on her economic income. Who's home? So the family's not home. Guess who ends up becoming the family? The streets become the family. And the reality is, as much as our children get on the streets, the more the streets become their families. One of the things that my students used to always say to me is, man, Miss Shirley, we ain't out here living, we're just surviving. And I keep saying that because I want you to understand A generation who does not love life and does not fear death is a generation headed for trouble. Simple as that, right? When the young people say to me, more than half of my young people kept saying to me, I've never heard the words, I love you. These people don't want me, man. I'm a burden. So since I'm a burden, I'm gonna go out here and make my own money. We do not understand the power that those three words have. And I oftentimes like to let adults understand. If you're in a relationship with someone and you never hear I love you, you begin to doubt yourself. So what would make you think that it's any different for a child in a relationship with their parents or in a household? These kids don't intend to be here long. And if that's the mindset, there's music actually being propagated right now that we're paying for on iTunes and Amazon and everything else, talking about who these kids, like with names. I shot this person, I shot that person, and we're glorifying death. A kid gets arrested, he's going down the street. By the time he gets to the corner, all of them are, they got the phone talking about free my dog. He's only going down the street because we're trying to stop a fight. But do we understand what our young people are living? Because the reality is our young people are living what many adults in 2 lifetimes may never live. How do you reach a generation that doesn't feel like you care enough to worry about where they come from? Juneteenth only matters if we as a generation, if we as a community matter. Juneteenth only matters because when we say freedom for Black people, it needs to be all Black people. It can't be for some, it can't be for part, it needs to be all Black people. But the problem with Juneteenth is if we are just starting to celebrate Juneteenth since 1865, who's passing it down to our children? And which version are we passing down? Because clearly we understand it wasn't the version that most people want to hear because they banned it from allowing to be heard. So I dare to say to you, there is a transfer of knowledge. There's a transfer of culture. There's a transfer of information. There's a transfer of love for your history. There's a transfer of real history that is fractured along the way. Not only is the transfer not happening, but who's on the other hand to receive the information and how are they going to pass it on? So why should this matter to you? As educators, the one thing that no one can ever take away from our youth is what you pour into them. You are indeed the lifeline of any and every generation. Everybody else on here, law enforcement, healthcare, academia, funders, social, everybody else is secondary to the amount of work you do. Because the one thing that no one can take away from me are my degrees, are my education. Because at the end of the day, them papers don't mean nothing if I didn't get anything in my head. And the only people, a lot of time that our kids have that are pouring into them are each and every one of you sitting on this call. The reality is there are such things as barriers and gaps. There are technological gaps which made virtual learning damn near impossible. There are there are language barriers which makes I may know the information but can't transcend and transfer the information to my child because we don't speak the same language. There's a communication barrier. There's a generational gap happening. So when we take all of those things into account, we should also be asking ourselves, how are we going to pass down our information, who we are, our history, our wins, our losses, our pains, and all of our moments of awareness? Who do we pass that down to, right? It bothered me, and it continues to bother me when I hear people say, well, I didn't know nothing about the Tulsa, Oklahoma bombing. I didn't know anything about the whole, Black Wall Street. So that alone says to us, there's so much more work. I'm gonna ask everybody to mute themselves, please. That alone says to us, there's so much more work because we have picked and choose which parts of the story we want to tell our people. So yes, Opal Lee at 94 years old, we're celebrating 100% who we are. But then how do we solve the problem of making sure that there's a body of people ready to receive that information? There isn't one solution. I'll be lying to you if I said I had the solution, but I know that one doesn't exist alone. I can also say to you that it's going to take all of us, a multi-approach solution, right? After school programs, sports, arts, church, everyone needs to be at the table, which I said a little bit earlier, I can never understand why we don't show coaches the value that they need, because there are some students that aren't gonna learn in the classroom, but darn it, they're gonna learn on the courts and they're gonna learn on the fields. Parental involvement. Parent is not just the two people that have the children. It's everybody that's involved in their lives. It's everybody that pours into their lives. It's everybody who wants to see them get from point A to point B. And then lastly is the concept of mutual accountability. Last year, we saw everybody screaming and hollering, this is not right, enough is enough. What we saw with George Floyd became more than a moment, and it became a movement because all of us got involved. It wasn't just Black people screaming, justice for all, no justice, no peace. Or, it wasn't just Black people on the streets marching across America. It took all of us. It was the shapes, all colors, all hues, all religion, demanding better. And what bothers me is when we go and we're watching the amount of young Black men lose their lives, and the silence of the community is deafening. That mutual accountability, if there's anything we were taught by Harriet Tubman, is that the only way as a people we succeed is by mutual accountability. The only way I help you move is by helping you succeed. Because when you succeed, I hope that you'll reach back and get somebody else and help them succeed. And then collectively, as a people, we succeed. Right now, we need to understand children are a product of the environment, of their environment. Home, school, church, community, that's part of that environment. They're in the middle of that. And at the end of the day, we need to begin to ask ourselves, what role do I play in making sure that this transfer of knowledge, this transfer of information is passing down? We are losing an entire generation. Our seniors are dying out and we're not passing the information. I can tell you now, if I ask some of my young folks how you make chitlins, they couldn't tell you because that transfer of information isn't happening. If I ask some of these young people, they might know who Basquiat is now because he's such a hot thing, but the transfer of information isn't happening. Our young people need to understand that Juneteenth cannot and should not be celebrated just as a day. Juneteenth is our history. That freedom that we're celebrating, freedom from what? Liberation from what? And until we can answer that what for them, and we can make sure they understand how that what transcends into who they are today and who they're going to be tomorrow, because they carry the baton of an entire people for us moving forward, then we need to continue to have these courageous conversations. The highest form of knowledge is empathy, for it requires us to suspend our egos and live in another's world. You know what ego is? It's our privilege. Let's stop assuming we understand what children are going through. Let's stop assuming we understand what parents are going through. But more importantly, let's meet children where they are and stop asking them to meet us where we are. We went to school. We got the fully developed frontal lobe that can think, if I do this, this will happen. We told Broward County Public Schools that I was the best person for this job. Then we need to do the job and meet children where they are. Juneteenth is about a couple of things, but the ones that I chose to stick with the most is about love. It's love for self, it's love for one another, it's love for our community, but more important, it's a love for our history. It's building a trust between our younger generation and our older generation to have them understand we are all an ecosystem. It's a belonging to know that I belong to a race so great that the first free Black country was a Black country that was calling other places to come to their country, and that country being Haiti. But more importantly, Juneteenth was about us all standing together and saying, we cannot, shall not, and will not progress unless we're being open and willing to have honest conversations. And the only way that we have open and honest conversations so that our children, who are the sponges of what we do, mimic that, is by being able to not sympathize with people, but empathize with other people's realities. Not all of them knew how to read. Harriet Tubman didn't have to create no railroad. Why did she do it? Because Matthew Pigott said it better than anybody could have said it this morning. It's about building up our children. And we build up our children so we help them understand where they came from, where they are, how this is not acceptable, so that we can continue to pass on the baton so that they can build a more transformative, more prosperous, and a more successful community for the generations to come. I know I often get the call, how do I find you? How do I connect with you? You can follow us our website is U-Turn, www.U-Turn Youth Consulting. You can follow us on Facebook and Instagram, uturnyouthconsulting.com, where we continue these courageous conversations. And you can follow me personally on Facebook and Instagram on Dr. Shirley. And I want to wrap up with this. This day was not about just the title. It wasn't just about the parties. It isn't just about the money that we're going to spend into celebrating this monumental moment. I pray, I challenge you, I encourage you, find a young person. Don't read to them. Pass down your culture, pass down your knowledge, pass down your history, for that is truly the celebration of Juneteenth. If we're not passing it down and we're leaving with it, we have failed our young people to stand in a community without knowing who they are, whose they are, but more importantly, how powerful they are. Thank you for coming. I'm gonna open it up for about 2-3 minutes for questions, comments, and concerns. I'll stop sharing. And thank you for being here. Open up for questions. I'm gonna stop talking. I'm gonna mute my mic and let y'all do some talking for the next 2 or 3 minutes. Thank you so much. I appreciate, thank you for taking the time. Thank you for choosing my session. And I hope it was so worth your time.
You have to unmute, Dr. Plantin. Unmute.
I'm sorry. I thank you guys. I was like, oh, y'all are quiet. No comments at all. That worries me. That means I don't know how good I was, or how bad I was for that matter. But what I was saying is I want to thank everyone for the kind words on the chat. I want to be very clear that this work is going to take all of us. I'm just the mouthpiece. And I want to continue to sound the alarm and ring the bell and say, we've got to do better, because otherwise Juneteenth will mean nothing, and we will be celebrating it with picnics and cookouts till we turn blue, and it will have no meaning behind it unless we're absolutely passing down our generation. Mr. Horace Hall, is that a hand up?
Yes, Doc.
Go ahead, my dear. Go ahead.
I like that one. So, but the thing is, I often say that
I'm sorry, we can't hear you.
Can't hear you.
I'm unmuted.
Speak a little bit louder.
Oh, okay. I said I thank you and I applaud your efforts and the work you're doing. This presentation was well received. I just want to endorse most of the portions that we tend to be judgmental as to the parenting of these children. It's a lot for the parents. I often endorse parental involvement though, but as you said, it takes all of us, not being just the father or the mother, to parent these children, and that is so true. And we need to get the young people involved in the 4 spheres that you show: the church, the community, the school. It takes all of us. Like we often say, it takes the village, and that what you describe comprises the entire village. I thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you. I appreciate that. Anybody else? Because I know you guys are running out. The next session is starting. I'm going to give you about another minute. Thank you for all the great comments. Makita, thank you so much. People who have heard me speak before, thank you for coming back. I must be doing something right. Again, I will say I will be teaching cultural competency. They're asking us to let our students know. I'll be teaching cultural competency for academic achievement starting Tuesday. If you haven't signed up, I'm not sure if they're still open or if there's still space. I'll only be teaching it for a couple of weeks. For those who have had me before, I'd be happy to have you back. And y'all know we gonna keep it real, 100%, as the kids say. In fact, we gonna keep it real 1,000. No cap, is we go in and we go hard. So I thank you all for coming. I thank you guys for engaging. Thank you for the encouraging words. And I pray, remember, don't make this just about the celebration. Make sure you're passing something on to somebody else who's a lot younger than all of us. Thank you all so much. Y'all have a good one.